Well, I'm Jim Hawkins, and I was born and raised in Athens, Georgia, about 90 miles up the road here. Um, and I attended the University of Georgia, and while I was in the University of Georgia, I was also a musician, and I started working with the Walden agency here. They were booking my band, the Embers, Eddie B and the Embers, and that was in 1964. I met Alan Walden 2 weeks after Phil had left to go to Germany for the military. Okay, so yeah, that and you know, I worked with them a good bit, and we were planning to build a recording studio for Otis, and I'm giving you the Reader's Digest version here, but I avoided being drafted by joining this Air National Guard unit out here when we first started figuring out, talking about this studio we were going to build, because I said, oh my God, if I get out of, I was in graduate school then, and I said, if I leave graduate school, you know, I'll be drafted. And anyway, I went off to do my active duty in the Air National Guard, and while I was gone, Otis was killed in a plane crash. And I couldn't even get leave to come home for the funeral or anything, but I had leave in January, and a 2-week leave, and I came home, and I took the bus home. I took Greyhound. I was in Biloxi, Mississippi, and Keesler Air Force Base, and I took the Greyhound to Columbus, and then we get to Columbus and had to change to Trailways in Columbus. Trailways had a route that left there and came through Macon and turned around in Athens. And so I got on that bus, and you know, in those days there was a bus every couple of hours, and you could get off and spend a couple of hours and catch the next one on to Athens, which is what I did. I rolled into, because I had ridden that other bus all night long, rolled into Macon kind of early in the morning, and I just got off the bus and walked up to 535 Cotton Avenue and opened the door, and Phil was standing right behind Carolyn's desk, and he just looks at me and said, "You still gonna build a studio, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." So I said, "Yeah, sure, okay." And so I came and lived here for about 4 years. I moved here in 1968 and was here through in part of 71.
My name is Bobby Wallace. My daddy went to New York City because his sister was wanting to be on Broadway, and his mother was up there, so he went up there for the summer, had a blind date with my mother. They fell in love, got married. I was born in Jersey City, New Jersey. My daddy didn't like the North. He wanted people to say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. So we came back to Macon in 42, and he went to Warner Robins to work during the war at the Air Force Base. And so we lived there and came back to Macon in 45, and phew, you know how fast that time goes. So Phil Walden and I opened a little booking agency office in 61, and that didn't last long. The money wasn't right for me, and I had to go to work. And one day, I was working for an office equipment company, and one day they said I had to do a day a week in the store. So one day they says, somebody wants to see you up in the furniture. And I go up there, and it's Otis and Phil, and they looking for a desk for Otis's office.
I remember that desk.
That was a hell of a desk.
That was a beautiful desk.
Oh man, it was a
Yeah.
one of a kind that we bought at a show. And anyway, long story short, sold them the desk. Otis was killed. Phil called me one day and said, "Let's do lunch." And he told me he needed some help. They had 50 rhythm and blues acts. Plus, they had, Otis had just died. So in March of '68, I went back to work for him. That's when I met Jim Hawkins.
Yeah, I got there in April.
Yeah.
Yeah, April, around the 20th, 21st, something
Right.
like that.
And he literally built that studio out of a part of a warehouse, and built it. Pretty much. You had a contractor to help you with.
We had the Middleton brothers
Yeah.
were my contractors. Chanks Hugh Middleton was the contractor, and he and his brother worked together there, and
Yeah.
they had built Otis's house ranch, out at, and they did the work when Phil and Otis remodeled 535 Cotton Avenue. So they were kind of our contractors,
Right.
and I loved them. They were good folks,
So you start building the studio. What kind of timeline? How long did it take you to complete the studio?
Well, it was really about a year before we were making records in there. Well, it was a little less than that, really, which is kind of incredible when you think
Yeah.
about it, considering that we had, back in those days, you couldn't go out and buy a mixing console. You had to build that too. But we were beginning to, studio wasn't finished or anything, but we were beginning to record in there by the end of the year, first of early in January or something. And it's my recollection that Duane and them came on the 11th of March. That was my birthday. That's how I can remember when it was. And I was on active duty out at the airport, out at Cochran Field, doing my 2 weeks
Yeah.
duty with the National Guard. And so after I finished a day's work out there, then I came to the studio and met the Allman Brothers, or what would become the Allman Brothers, once Greg was added into it. And we started recording.
Yeah.
What was that initial contact, that very first day, that experience like?
Wasn't it? I mean, when I'm meeting Duane.
Yeah, when you
Well,
met the Allman
understand, the Allman Brothers wasn't the Allman Brothers back then,
Yeah.
We knew of Duane. We'd been listening to The Weight and and Wilson, Hey Jude, and these different guitar solos that Duane had put on some various hit records that we were hearing on the radio. And so, it was interesting, but we were working with celebrity entertainers all the time. So, it's not like it was something out of the way for us or anything.
No.
But it was a little, Duane's approach to music was a little different. It was
Duane-
louder. It was a little
Duane's-
louder.
Duane's approach to everything.
It was louder, wasn't it?
Yeah. They were so excited about him.
Yeah.
And Muscle Shoals. And Rick Hall says, "You got to sign this guy. You got to do something with him." So Phil called me in his office one afternoon and says, "I want you to meet Duane Allman." And he said, then he says, "Has anybody got a knife?"
Duane said that.
Duane said, I said, "Yeah, I've got one in my pocket. I had a little old bitty gentleman's knife. It had
All gentlemen carried a pocket knife. All males carried a pocket knife at that point in
a
time.
clean handkerchief
Yeah.
and a quarter or a dime.
A pocket knife.
Yeah. But so he took out a chunk of cocaine big as the end of my thumb and shaved off enough, handed me back my knife, and I left the room because I didn't want to. I was just getting introduced to marijuana, and I knew I didn't want to take another step. So, but then, you know, it was incredible.
Well, the Pig was a popular spot for us to go for lunch a lot of times, and in particular, it was, you know, we'd go there for lunch. We'd all pile in Phil or Alan's car. At this point in time, they were both sporting new Eldorados.
They bought they bought a pair of Eldorados.
And Otis had one too, and they all had telephones in their cars, and this was not too usual in 1966 and 67 and so forth. And I mean, and another thing you need to appreciate about what was going on down at 535 Cotton Avenue, nobody there was 30 years old.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't have nobody telling us what to do, how to do it. And we would go to lunch at the Pig, and Phil would tell Carolyn, you know, if anybody really needed to talk to him, call him on his car phone down there. You know, and they would sit down there conducting business on their phones, and
They were hilarious.
and it was just, you know, and I've been trying to remember the name of our favorite car hop down there.
Anderson, wasn't it?
And that's not the one I remember.
That was Norwood Anderson.
Was there a Leroy?
Leroy Scott.
Leroy is the one I remember.
Was famous.
Yeah.
Leroy
You
is
had
the one.
Norwood, and you had Matt that sang the menu.
Yeah,
A couple of them would sing the menu.
Yeah.
good.
Phil and I opened a little booking agency office, and we were both at Mercer. And I was on academic probation. I still got the letter.
I had that honor once too.
He said, you need to take a month off, a quarter off. So I did, went back. But anyway, that didn't work, the booking agency, for me. It worked for the Waldens, but I got a real job. And then I was selling for American Office Equipment Company, and I had to spend a day a week in the store. Somebody said, somebody wants to see you up in the furniture, wants to see somebody. So I went up there, and Phil and Otis were looking for a desk. And anyway, we didn't really stay in touch, but one day Phil called me and said, let's go to lunch. And we didn't go to the Pig, we went to the Bell House. And so anyway, he said he needed some help. You know, this was right after Otis had died, a couple of months. And they had all these rhythm and blues acts, about 50 of them. So I went back to work for him, and had several companies. The one I worked for was called Phil Walden and Associates, and it was the management company. So I had a lot of my duties were dealing with the artists that we had. I spent a lot of time with Tony Joe White. Spent a lot of time with Boz when he was living in Macon. And we tried to manage Boz, but we just couldn't. He was going through some personal stuff and was having trouble. But I don't know where I was going with that.
Well, that's how you got down here and started working with Phil.
Again,
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
We tried real hard to sign Gary Puckett, but couldn't do it. And we signed Tony Joe White, and I had a ball with Tony Joe. I traveled all over the place with him. He did a lot of television work in California. And I bet I went out just 5 or 6 times. And Frank Fenter was an incredible man. I mean, he really, really was. He was a South African and ran Atlantic Records operation in Europe, and that's, I don't know how the hell Phil talked him into leaving that job and coming to Macon, except that Frank wanted his own record company. He wanted, and he had that opportunity with Phil. And but anyway, every time Percy Sledge would release a record in this country, it might hit the Hot 100, and if it did, it wouldn't do much. But every time they released a Percy Sledge record in South Africa, it went to the top of the charts in weeks. So Frank said, well, you know, we ought to send Percy over there. So he called some folks he knew. They sent Percy to, they booked a concert tour. They sent Percy to South Africa, and he was over there a long time making big money. And it got over. It was time. Percy, they had really strict rules about what folks could do. And Percy had violated some of those, so it was time to go get him.
Big etiquette.
He didn't
Yeah,
know
he didn't
proper
know.
big etiquette.
It was time to go get him or bring him home. But they were going to do a concert film in Swaziland with Percy, so I don't know why I was blessed with this, but they said, you got to go to Africa and help Percy through this movie and bring him home by way of Amsterdam and London. But it was an incredible trip. But anyway, got him home safe and alive. I mean, that was, you know, Phil said, Bobby, you got to go. Bobo is what they call him. Said, Bobo, you got to go and bring Percy Sledge back from Africa. And I said, that's no problem, Mr. Phil. He said, well, you got to bring him back alive. So I did.
Explain it like that.
Yeah, might have made it a little more difficult.
Go eat frequently at the Pig and Whistle there on Ponce de Leon. And I remember seeing Blind Willie McTell. I didn't know who he was then, you know, it was years later, but I mean, you know, music's always had my attention, and when I was two years old, I remember the man playing the guitar at the Pig and Whistle, yeah. Well, you know, Twigs, I mean, the Dixie Dregs owe it all to Twigs, really, because he sort of, he got them, he managed them.
Yeah.
And he got them the record deal and all that stuff. And then when he did, he came to me, and we built their first road rigs for them, you know, speaker cabinets and amplifiers and all.
Tell me about the book, because I want to include that.
Okay, I actually have two books out. The first one was called No Saints, No Saviors, My Years with the Allman Brothers Band, and it's basically a narrative of from the first day I ever heard about them and the unlikely series of events that led me to get a job with them, and then the whole triumph and tragedy of their lives and careers. The second book is more of a coffee table picture book. It's called the Allman Brothers Memorabilia, 1969 to 76. So it covers the so-called golden age of when Duane and of course he was not there that long, but Duane and the original band members up through the mid-70s.
Mid-70s. What year did you start with the band?
I started in 1970, June the 1st, 1970. But I had met them the previous year, and of course, first time I heard them play, I said, "Man, I gotta get in on this." I'll tell you another thing about Cher. She was fascinated with Piggly Wiggly grocery stores. She said, "What in the hell is a Piggly Wiggly?" Yeah, she was always kind of enthralled with Macon. She liked the town, and she spent quite a bit of time here when she was with Greg. You know, but Pig and Whistle is, all I can tell you is I had more fun. I'd go there and I'd tip Anderson to sing me a Work With Me Annie song. I'd pay him a quarter tip and he'd sing the whole song, you know, and Phil put him into his first group that he actually managed before, were called the Heartbreakers. And they included Anderson from the Pig and Whistle and Ham Johnson from Trailways and a guy named, that was the member of the Shooter. Just those two I can remember right now, but there were 3-member group. And they sang at the Douglas Theater on the amateur shows that Otis kept winning. Okay, so meanwhile Otis is performing and Phil and I are across over at Trailways listening to him sing over the radio, because we couldn't go into the Black Theater here in Macon. And it wasn't because the owner objected to us coming in there. It was because he said the vice squad would come in and threaten his license if they found a white person in there. And so we didn't go in. We sat across over at Trailways and listened to him on the radio. But Otis won time after time after time, you know, and he had Johnny Jenkins with him at the time. And Johnny Jenkins, Phil fell in love with Johnny Jenkins. I mean, the sun rose and set on Johnny Jenkins. And he was a super talented guy. And Otis was the second singer in the Pine Tops. They had another guy named Willie Jones. But you know, that he won so many times that they asked him not to perform in the amateur shows anymore. By then, the Heartbreakers had already broke up. But one night, like I said, let me say this about the Pig. The Pig and Whistle was where the pretty girls went. I'm serious, you know, the real good-looking women were at the Pig and Whistle. And all I can tell you is that I like good-looking women. And so I would take my entertainers out to WNEX radio with F.C. Franklin at night. And by the way, my daughter now does a show on WNEX downtown. But I'd take the entertainer out there, and it was the only white radio station that had power at night, real power, that played our kind of music, you know. And FC was a very soulful guy, and I ended up using him as the MC on a lot of my shows that I did. But when we'd finish our interview out there at the radio station, we'd say, well, we got to get on out of here. We're going down to the Pig and Whistle and get something to eat. And that's all we had to say. By the time we get to that Pig and Whistle, buddy, there'd be a lot of pretty girls there. They'd all be wanting to talk to the entertainer, you know. And so we always had an attraction there. Otis held a lot of jobs. About a week. He'd say that he picked up that first paycheck and then he'd be gone again. You know, Otis knew he wanted to be a singer, and he never stopped following that dream at all. He was a well driller more than anything. Well driller. He was that more than any other occupation that was steady, you know. One of the first times I really got to know Otis, my father had called me back in the back of Gay Clothing Company and given me $60 and told me I need to go over to the courthouse to bail Otis out of jail. And I did, and I mean, here I am, man. I'm still in high school, right? I never even been in a courtroom ever before, you know. I'm walking around like, what am I gonna know to do when I get in here? And I'm looking up, and everything's so official, and everything's so quiet. And finally, Otis looked up and saw me when I got in the closer row, and
told his lawyer that I was there with the money, and they immediately let him go ahead and get out. But when he got out, boy, I heard the most vivid description of what it's like to breathe fresh air and to see the beautiful sunlight. Oh, God, it's just so wonderful to be able to walk free. I mean, he's going on and on and on about what it means to get out of the jail. Well, then I found out he'd been up there under the clock for 3 days. So he was ready to get out of there for sure. And I never went under the clock, but I always heard that's someplace you never wanted to be. But on the way back to Gaius, he and I talked a lot, and we got to be at least knowing each other, friends then. But I didn't hang out with them a lot, you know. I'd go to a gig where they were playing, and I'd step back and say hello or something, and shoot short change, you know. But then when I got the call from Phil that he was having to leave for Germany the next day, and he didn't have anybody to run the company, and I'm the last one that he knows he can call, and I took it. You know, I wasn't a great student to begin with, and I was at Mercer, and they had given me Christianity, literature, and Spanish. I have my own Christian beliefs, and I believe my way in God, and it doesn't mean I form my own. I had 12 hours training, and I had to step into being the manager of Otis Redding. And I had never worked with musicians in my life, so that's one hurdle I got to get over. Okay, I had not worked with that many African Americans. I had a lawnmower cutting service where I hired the young guys to cut the grass for me, you know. That was my only dealing there, so I had to overcome the second racial hurdle, you know, and I say I did a good job of it, because if you can imagine being Otis Redding, you got a hit record out there, and all of a sudden the manager that he believes in totally is now in Germany, and his little brother, who looks about 14, is taking over his career. Okay, now that shows you what kind of character Otis Redding was there. He loved my brother so much that he wouldn't dare leave the company. He stayed there in support. At one point, I actually found myself about $20,000 in debt, where I'd never been in debt over $150. And now I owe over $20,000 out there. Guess who to? My relatives. And Waldens will have to pay Waldens, or it can get bad, you know. So, you know, when Phil left me, he told me, he said he had $5,000 in the bank, and he forgot to tell me he had $10,000 worth of debts. So I started out in the hole, and he had invested some of Otis's royalties into Mr. Kennedy's. When he was having bad luck, Phil loaned him the money thinking that he would make a big comeback and pay Otis a lot of interest. Well, it turned out he went broke. And so guess who inherited that in debt, you know? Plus, I had to tell him how it went down, and Otis understood the whole situation. Most people would have screamed and hollered, "Oh, you took my damn money," or something like that, you know. But Otis understood the situation. So as it got worse, I had a group called the Fiestas in there. They had a big record. It was So Fine, and Bobby Marchand, who had a big record with There Is Someone on Your Mind. And of course I had Percy Wells and Eddie Kirk, but they were good. The Fiestas and Bobby Marchand broke me every week. I heard every excuse in the world for them to borrow some money, all the way from baby needs shoes to they're gonna tow our car away, to everything. They made up something every day, and I told Otis I had gotten, like I said, deep into debt, and I called Otis, and he was in Washington or Baltimore. I can't remember which one, but I told him that, Otis, I'm actually having thoughts of I may have to close down the office. I said it's just eating me up. I'm losing money. I'm losing money. I'm losing money, and it's money that I don't have. And so Otis jumps on an airplane and flies to Macon to see little brother. All right. Otis starts telling me, you don't know how hard your brother and I worked for this damn company. You're not going to shut the doors on it. If I have to take all of my money off the road, my road receipts and my recording royalties, I will put it into the company to keep it open until your brother returns. And he did it in a chewing out way. Well, I never had an African American talk to me like that, you know. I'm sitting there going, wow. I'm sitting here, he's telling me, but he's making sense. All the things he's saying is, I will do this and I will do that. And he did those things. I got to drop the Fiestas and Bobby Marchand. I did keep Percy Welch and the Hornets and Eddie Kirk, and I did keep Johnny Jenkins and the Pine Top. And I started making money, and by the time Phil came home, we were making some good money. And Phil asked me, he said, well, you've been in here for 2 years, and you kind of learned everything about the business. He says, I got it. But I want to ask you, what do you want to do? And you want to go back to school, or you want to come to work in the office with me? And I said, well, I can't see going back to school to learn how to make less money than what I'm making right now with Otis. I mean, Otis had jumped up and was getting anywhere from $12.50 a night to $2,000 a night at that time, you know, and that's a lot of money in those days for one. He had maybe 3 records out, and he was making that kind of money. But more than anything, Otis became my best friend during that time period. I got to the point where, man, I got to see how the black man was treated, you know. No matter what he's accomplished in life, I got to see how they were treated, all because they were black. And I, to be honest with you, I got to the point where I didn't like my own people sometimes, you know. I mean, it was just stupid things, mean things that just should have never happened, you know. And thank God, God did straighten it all out, you know, but not all the way, but we're still working on it. But he showed me that. And that to me was a very learning experience, you know. And so when Otis moved to Round Oak, I moved next door to be next door to him. Well, I'd be around him. I was a mile away from his house, but I was still the next door neighbor. And while out there, man, we had some of the best times of our lives, you know. The damn 276 acre land, and I picked out the horses for him, bought his horse and Zelma's horse and my horse and a guest horse, you know. And I picked them all out, and I taught Otis how to ride horses and hunt and fish and do a lot of things that made him relax when he'd come home, you know. And he taught me how to structure songs, and it's a gift that I thank him for every day, you know. I co-wrote a lot of the early Otis Redding songs that, and Phil did as well. Phil co-wrote some of the songs that was on Otis's first products. But I never asked for writer's royalties because Otis was teaching me how to write. So I didn't ask for the right. I was just honored that he was putting my lyrics into his song, you know. I'm just doing a good manager's job of trying to help my artists come up with a hit song. And but Chained and Bound, I wrote all that line in there about taller than the tallest pine and sweeter than the grape on the vine. And I co-wrote, we called it Destiny, and it ended up becoming another title. It'll come to me in a minute. It'll have to come to me in a minute, but I wrote part of that song, Destiny, and it's what kind of life is this that I'm living? Lord, what kind of love is this you're trying to give me? Oh, I feel like standing up and telling the world I'm a change to your love. And Mr. Pitiful, I actually came up with the melody. Now, I was good at lyrics, okay? I was perfected at lyrics. But coming up with a melody, with me having no music background, not playing any instrument at all, not even knowing if you're singing in B flat or not, you know, for me that was incredible. But I took it out of the other song. That song title for Destiny was Your One and Only Man. And I took the bass line where Otis is ending Your One and Only Man, and the bass player jumps into a whole different beat, and it drives it out. And it's doom da doom 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 doom. And I told it to him while he was taking a shower in Memphis, and he said, "They call me Mr. Blue." And I said, "No, Otis, yesterday, don't you remember that disc jockey called you Mr. Pitiful? Said you sure sing pitiful to them ladies. They love you singing that, you know." And anyway, another song called Ton of Joy. I wrote about 45% of that song. And Love Comes and Goes, I wrote about 35% of that song. And but I was always there. And then 3 days before he died, he and I and a singer named Roy Lee Johnson. Roy Lee Johnson had a record called Black Pepper Make You Sneeze. And the Beatles even recorded one of his songs, you know. Well, he and I and Otis sat down in Redwall's basement, and we were rewriting Dock of the Bay. I didn't like all that stuff about I ain't got nothing to live for, ain't nothing going my way, and Otis's career is just booming out at this point. I'm talking about movie scripts on his desk, and the terms prices already jumped tremendously, you know, and you got everything in the world to live for, you know. You got one of the brightest futures of any entertainer, and I didn't like that part, you know, and so anyway, and I wasn't the only one. There were a lot of people asking that question. And then for him to be whistling at the end of it, I mean, Otis was known for his ad-libs at the end of a song, you know. He put the gottas on you at the end of it, made you feel good as he was going out, you know. Otis did more to the word gotta than any human being in the world. He made his, clear my voice to do it, gotta. Good God Almighty, I gotta, you know. And he'd drive it hard like that. And man, can you imagine him out on stage singing Satisfaction, which he covered of the Rolling Stones because the Rolling Stones hung out with him while he was overseas doing the European tour. But, you know, he gets into this part about, I got to have me some satisfaction. Give me some satisfaction. You got to have some satisfaction. He wants some satisfaction. Buddy, that band just kicking. And I saw women jumping like I ain't ever seen before. I mean, he put that got to put a whole new bump in their dance, you know. And I loved it. I mean, when he did Gottas, I could stay right there with him. And I loved Otis with a love to me that was greater than love. You know, we were true brothers, and Otis brought most of his personal problems to me, and then he would take the business decisions to Phil to help him make. Then they would bring them to me. See if I always said when the three of us sat down, we had that triangle. We got three different personalities, all working together on trying to achieve one goal, just one. And all three of us thinking about how we're going to do it. Like when we planned how we were going to take Europe, you know, we sat down and drew out the design of what to do, you know. Well, Otis dethroned Elvis Presley as the #1 male singer in Europe one year. He was the only black man in the whole top 10, you know. And what made him so big was the Temptations had recorded this song, My Girl. Well, Otis recorded it in his mind. He was showing Barry Gordy how you should have put the horns on My Girl. That's exactly what he said to me, you know. Let's see, let me show Barry how to put the horns on this song, you know. Well, the song was so good that Atlantic heard it, and they turned around and released Otis's version of My Girl in Europe before the Temptations did. So he had the big hit with My Girl. It was one of his biggest records in Europe. And that was the year that he won the #1 pole position. But one of the smartest moves Atlantic Records ever made, you know, and in those years, Atlantic and Motown fought out, hand, tooth, and nail. I mean, they were in direct competition with each other, you know. Jerry Wexler was the godfather of soul music as far as a record executive, and he was vice president of Atlantic Records. And he could talk with you, extremely intelligent, but at the same time, he could sit down with the street guy and go, yeah, man, what's happening? You know, he was that hip. And he loved the Waldens, and we loved him. Another guy named Joe Galkin, who was an Atlanta promotion man, is a little short, fat Jewish guy. And he drove around in a Thunderbird like Lee's with a telephone in it. And that impressed me to no end, boy. You got your own phone in your car. I mean, you can ride down the road and be taking care of business. And it impressed me to the point I had to have a phone soon. But Joe Galkin was one of the chief promotion men. And he was the reason why Johnny Jenkins' Master of Love Twist went to Atlantic Records and was on Atlantic Records. It actually sold about 100,000 copies, which was considered a hit in those years. And you know, and Otis went up with Johnny for his second session, and drove him up there. Phil planned it where he'd be up there and get a chance to get an audition maybe, and you know, he'd have another artist. But that happened. Otis asked him, there was 30 minutes left over on the session. Everybody's tired. The Johnny Jenkins session went bad. I mean, it was just, they didn't get anything new on Johnny that could be used. And Johnny at that time drank heavily. And it was just a bad session. Anyway, the musicians are pretty disgusted. They're tired and they want to go home. And Otis had asked Al Jackson, would he give him a chance to hear, for Otis to sing a song for him. He just wanted to give him his opinion of that song. And so Al caught Steve Cropper and said, hey man, this guy's been bugging me all day. He's a nice guy. He's not a pest bug, but he really wants to know if he can put out a demo. Oh man, everybody's tired. We're going on. Steve said, come on, let's do it. Well, they did it. In 30 minutes now, they cut Hey, Hey, Baby and These Arms Are Mine, both. Hey, Hey, Baby sounded exactly like Little Richard. Richard had quit singing rock and roll, so we figured that would put Otis in there, and he might replace Little Richard. Well, Hey, Hey, Baby didn't do it. It was not a hit record at all, you know, and there were no sales. And ended up Joe Galkin and Phil got to know John R. I don't know if you remember John R., but John R. was on WLAC, which was a 50,000 watt station that turned. So you'd be listening to radio and you'd have to go close to the radio sometimes, and you have to get away from it because it'd be too loud. And they were these soulful guys, very, very soulful guys, talking about drinking that Black Label beer out there on a picnic with your sweet baby and talking all that stuff. Turns out there's 3 old white men talking black. And, man, they played nothing but the blues and Otis Redding. John R. and Hamp Swain played Otis Redding's These Arms of Mine for 9 months before that record hit. But when it hit, it was steady and still one of his most popular songs today. And but those guys in Nashville, I used to be so close with John R. I could look at my watch and tell you what the next record was going to be he'd play, and it'd be for me. He was kind of like one of my godfathers in the music business. He and Wexler and Joe Galkin all. And I could call John up in the middle of the night while he was on the air, and he'd take my call. And we got a new Kelly Brothers here that we're going to put on, you know. Nobody anywhere else in the country's played the Kelly Brothers. One just John R. started playing it everywhere. Picked up spots everywhere, you know. He was a big influence. He used to go to all the black DJ conventions, and he'd get me to hang out with him. He taught me a lot about what to do with black disc jockeys, and I found out real quick that they like payola. They like payola a lot. It's against the law, but they liked it, and we wanted our records played, so we took. I used to answer the telephone. Tell you how bold I was. I'd answer the phone. Take care of business. That meant, yes, sir, I'll do whatever it takes to get you to play this record. And I might give them a date on Otis Redding. I might give them a part of a show that we had going on. Might give him cash, you know. I knew how to palm 20s and 100s just to like, you know. And I'd walk into the big stations up north and shake hands, and there'd be $50 to $100 in my hand when they could pull that. Nobody ever saw them. They were so smooth at taking that bill out of my hand. So here's this white cracker from Georgia down here taking care of the black disc jockey only made like $100 to $125 during those years. So I mean, if you gave them $20, man, that was a nice little boost, you know. And so then I'm giving them 20. Then Otis is probably giving them 20 when he comes to town. And if Phil sees them, he's probably going to give them another 20. You know, as long as they were playing our records, man, I could break records as fast as anybody in the world. I mean, I had a list of black jockeys that were in my pocket that are still my friends today. Same guys are, you know. Hamp Swain, by the way, is the world's greatest disc jockey, the nicest human being that I've ever met besides Otis. He's right up there next to Otis as far as being a gentleman and a great friend. In fact, I was the one that initiated him getting into the Georgia Music Hall of Fame because I thought he deserved it, you know. He was the first one to play Please, Please, Please by James Brown, and he's the first one to play These Arms of Mine by Otis Redding. And that alone right there says he was pretty hot fella, you know. Hamp Swain, Satellite Papa, John Person, Jive Master, oh gosh, I always forget, Charles Green that went up to Big Saw. I mean, we knew all the disc jockeys, you know. They used to run me out of WIBB radio station because they were scared I was going to give Hamp some payola. All I had to do is tell Hamp, come by my office when you get through working. And he'd come up there and get it, you know. But this manager would be looking all around at what I got in my hand and all this. I mean, he was trying to keep eye on me because he knew I was up to something. And but I'd always just tell him, hey, he's too close. I can't give it to you here. Come on by the office when you get done, you know. Ham Swain, I'll tell you this about him. I loaned him $40 one time because he needed it. And I thought, by my dealings with the other disc jockeys, that 40 is as good as gone. He won't, you know, he probably won't ever pay me that back. And I liked Hamp a lot, so I didn't mind. I was going to treat it like it was just pale. Buddy, I got to work at 8 a.m. the next morning. Hamp Swain's standing by my front door. He says, here's your $40. And I said, anytime, Hamp, anytime. And he never borrowed another dime from me. But I did also give him 10% of the Otis Redding homecoming show, which could turn out to be a couple of $1,000 at the end of the year. And $2,000 coming, you know, right before the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays. That was a pretty nice little paycheck for him, you know. And but he was a big advisor to us on promoting all the shows at the City Auditorium. He and Percy Welp were my two trainers about the City Auditorium. And buddy, I sure fooled the police and everybody went that year. We had to hire the policeman to watch the doors. Well, Clint would do that too. But then Clint didn't have anybody to watch the policeman. I had people that were watching the policeman, okay? And so if they went to take something, they'd walk over to him and say, no, that's got to go through the front door, you know. And then I had another guy that was watching the guy that was watching the policeman because I didn't want to take any chances. And the only one I caught stealing and cheating was Otis's bodyguard. He had a big bodyguard named Sylvester Huckabee. Lee knows him well. Huckabee was a bad fellow, wasn't he? This guy here, $50, he'd beat him as bad as you want them done, you know. And when here I am, a white guy that's 110 pounds, maybe 120 pounds tops. And I'm standing up to some of these guys that weigh 210 and 270 pounds and all that, you know. I say, I was brave. But I also now say, you were also stupid. You could have gotten killed a number of times. You know, I ran head on into the Blackstone Rangers one night. Yeah, that's Chicago, later become Black Panthers, okay? I met these guys. I went outside the Regal Theater to get some fresh air. And all of a sudden, this guy walks up to me and said, give me $10. Well, $10, man, that would be my whole day's little spending money for Cokes or hamburger or whatever, you know. And I look around, it's not just him. He's got 7 other guys with him. It's 8-1 here. And I'm the littlest one of them all, you know. And after I counted 8, I reached in my pocket and got my 10 out and handed it to him. And I said, do me a favor, will you? And he said, what's that? And I said, if y'all get something to drink, I sure could use a taste. And I was just being friendly. And so they left. I went inside the theater, not wanting to come back out ever again. I wanted to stay on the inside of the theater the rest of the night, you know. By the way, they had a girl group called the Rangettes. They doused the girl's big afro with lighter fluid and lit her, and she ran from the theater with a whole head of hair on, just to show they could do it and get away with it. They beat up a cop on one street corner while this cop on the other street corner turned his back. That's how bad the Rangers were. Well, I'm up there, and I figure I'm safe. I'm back in that dressing room. All of a sudden, the doorman hollers up and said, Alan, your buddies are back. And I said, tell them I'm not here. He said, Alan, you don't understand. We don't blank with the Rangers around here. They'll come in here and get you if you don't go down there and meet them. And I said, okay, well, I believe you. So I went back out in the alley, same 8 again. And, man, I walked right up to the guy and I said, what can I do for you? He opened his coat and he pulled out a bottle of cheap bourbon. I don't even like bourbon. I got sick on bourbon with early times back in high school. Once you get sick on that stuff too bad, you ain't going to ever drink mash again, you know. That's just, anyway, I chug-a-lugged that bottle like I was the strongest drinker in the world. I'm talking about I chug-a-lugged it till I felt like it was coming out of my nose and my ears, and thought I next step was going to be throwing it back up, you know. And I put that top back on it, Johnny Jenkins style, with the spin to it and the whole bit. Thanks, man, I needed that. And they walked away. They didn't say, you're welcome, goodbye, and then they just walked away. But again, God was with me on the road because he kept me from getting, they were known to be killers. I mean, you know, you just did not mess with them. That's like messing with the Crips.
You know, talking about music, when Bobby Wallace was here and was talking with Jim, I interviewed Johnny Sandlin a couple of years ago.
Did you?
Yeah, real, just great. But he wrote a part dedicated to the pig in his book, A Never-Ending Groove.
All right.
And he talked about how when important business decisions had to be made at Capricorn, that everybody would wind up in Phil's car sitting in the parking lot of the pig, getting advice from someone like Leroy. Do you remember any of that?
I remember those days. We had many, many important decisions made right there in the parking lot of the Pig and Whistle. Phil liked the Pig and Whistle just as much as me. Maybe not as much as me. Later on, he slowed down. Once Capricorn was in full swing, he slowed down and started eating it. Mark Sella and things like that, you know. And, but you know, a lot of decisions were made at the Pig and Whistle, you know. I used to live 3 or 4 doors up from Lee's corner, which was, I was on that side of the street. I was living with a guy named Duke Rohara. And Duke and Rohara and I, for entertainment, would crawl out on the roof of this apartment house. And we'd have our lawn chairs set up out there, and we'd wave at the girls when they went by. Our apartment stayed busy, boy. It was humming a lot, and we were just sitting out on the porch, you know. And you know, but when the Allman Brothers moved to town, they moved on College Street in that one. It had a 2-room apartment. Okay. They used one room to fill up storing the equipment. In the other room, they had sleeping bags down. Didn't have any TV. They had had a Coca-Cola machine that you could buy beers out of for 35 cents, you know. And they had a abstract on one wall where it was big square, smaller square, smaller square. But it worked out great if you had a movie projector. It was a great screen where you could sit and watch home movies right there, you know. And believe me, they wore one out of me and Phil riding motorcycles together. They, you know, they were real motorcycle people. We were amateurs compared to them. But they'd run it forward and backwards and all that. And they invited me over one day for a lily pond party. And I thought, oh man, they found this nice lily pond. I go over there. Lily pond's about that big. I mean, it is nothing but a gathering of the smokers. You know, I enjoyed in those days, you know, so it was still a fun party, even though Lily Pond wasn't about that big, you know. And we had some awful fun times over there. And they would sit out on the doorsteps close to College Street, and they'd sit right on, next to the sidewalk. And the Westland girls would just keep pulling up. I mean, carload after carload of girls would show up over at their place. And, you know, I didn't even know some of them name. You know, it was just like, it happened, over with, move to the next one, you know. That's how hot it was over there. You could get away with almost anything. They'd be eating psilocybin, I'd be smoking weed. And but there's a lot of activity right up here on College Street. And the girls from Westland are the ones who made them so popular here in Macon, because, man, they were getting a lot of good-looking women. Twigs was doing it. You know, we got to talk about Twigs Linden. Twigs Linden was the greatest road manager that ever existed, other than maybe Earl Speedo Sim. Twigs worked for Little Richard before he came to work for us, and with me he worked with Percy Sledge and Arthur Conley, and then the Allman Brothers. And once he got with the Allman Brothers, and he'd worked the Stax Boat package show overseas when Otis won the pole that year. And he actually copied a guy over there that was the road manager for that show, with the beard and walking cane and all that. I mean, Twigs really got into doing his job right. He bought an old packet limousine, and put a horribly expensive paint job on it. I mean, it was one where there were so many layers, like 15 layers of paint on the next car. And so he went out and bought him a chauffeur's outfit to drive everybody around in his limo. And he had a little gold plate in the back there that had the names of all the entertainers that had ridden in the packet. And but Twigs could figure out the impossible. When I had an impossible task ahead of me, I would call Twigs. And he'd sit down with his little calculations and this, that, and the other. And I asked him one time, we're jumping from Baton Rouge, Louisiana to Baltimore, Maryland in a 1949 Flexi bus that was not in good condition. And Twiggs says, if the band gets on the bus, travels safely at 60 miles per hour, the motor won't run hot. They eliminate all stops except for the bathroom at a fuel stop, so they can be rolling the whole time. They will arrive 30 minutes late for that gig. They were 29 minutes late for that gig. He was 1 minute off. That's how good he was. When he became the Allman Brothers manager, he made living on the road 3 times easier, because when they get off their plane, he'd hand them an envelope that had their room key already. They didn't have to go check in. He had already pre-checked them into a room. In that envelope was what other rooms everybody was in, where the music store was, where to call to get groupies, and another number to where to call to buy whatever drugs you might want. And his room naturally is in big letters where they could call him if they needed anything. He made it so easy for them. I mean, even on stage, Twig spelled out to exact where the trash cans went on stage, where the beer went, where the wine went. All specified on this rider that took an attorney to read, because he had so many referrals in it. It would take you probably 3 hours to read that rider, you know. But he'd make them do it. I mean, he most of the time they just said, "What? Just tell me what you want, and you got it," you know. And but Twigs used to have a lot of fun on the road. Twigs, first time Percy Sledge got a Cadillac with an automatic timer on the lights when you get out, you know. And Twigs had taken his stopwatch and he had timed how many seconds it took for that light to go out. He'd ride down the road till he got to an open window diner or restaurant or something where he could park right in front of the glass window. And he'd get out, and the timer would be on, and the lights would be on, and he'd walk into the restaurant, and they naturally, sooner or later, somebody says, "Hey, man, your light's on." He'd go, "Oh, no, I got it right here on remote control." And he said, "Remote control? You're full of bull." You know, he said, "Oh, yeah," and he's watching that stopwatch. As soon as that stopwatch gets ready to go, Twig said, "Oh, yeah, I got it right here." Click. Man sat down, stopwatch. All he did was stop the stopwatch. Headlights went down. he had a ball like that. One time in Mississippi, he was pumping the gas into the van. And the van's loaded with all the musicians, you know. And the guy that owns the station comes out there and says, "Boy, what you doing with all these bad words?" And Twig says, "You know, I have the hardest time convincing people that I'm not white." Yeah, guy's mouth would drop open. I mean, Twiggs was very light-skinned white, almost bleached white, you know. And he'd be laughing the whole time. He found out where a night club owner had a ticket box that had a phony bottom in it, had a trigger for it. And when the nightclub owner hit that trigger, all the tickets that were in this ticket box would drop down into the basement, and the door would close back up. And then he would only pay you on the tickets that came in after the drop. All right, well, Twigs got word of it, so he went to the club early for the setup time, and he rigged that guy's door where it wouldn't open. And then he sat down right across from the guy and watched the guy go through all the frustrations of trying to make that thing work. And Twigs is just sitting there smiling away. And he collected on the full amount. The box office never opened. The box never opened up.
When I come back down to Macon, I'll bring you a copy of the new book that just came out about Twigs.
What now?
There's a new book out about Twigs. I'll bring you a copy of it. A friend of mine wrote a book. He was the Dixie Dregs bus driver.
Okay.
His name was Ron Constantino, and it's called Remembering Twigs Linden.
Okay.
And there's some crazy stories.
I'd love to read it.
Pictures too. New pictures.
I would love to read it. I love Twigs. Twigs was my right arm. He and Speedo Sims and Otis Redding, and they were my right arms in those years, you know. They were as important as me having another good act to have a good road manager, because a lot of the entertainers, where they specialize, they have this special creative air about them that makes them where they can sing and write songs and play instruments and all. You know, they've got a special talent, right? But there's also going to be a vulnerable spot where those little professional cons out there on the road, they'll find it. I mean, they'll talk to them until they figure this guy out all the way, and then they'll play upon them and end up getting them to invest money in all sorts of crazy schemes that which ended up going in straight into that guy's pocket. And he'd have the dope connections and all that, and he ought to be the manager of the band. I mean, that was always the thing. I can't tell you, I probably fired 30 road managers because of them wanting to take over my job. You know, to be at work 2 weeks, got a new briefcase, a new pair of boots, buddy. They want to be the manager instead of the road manager, and they go after your job. And it was a known fact. They're gonna try it. Twigs didn't, Speedo didn't, and Rogers never did. And you know, so a good man on the road was just as good as having a brand new big act. By the way, Doug Hawthorne was another one that was a good road manager. First night on the job for Doug, he's in Mobile, Alabama with Percy Sledge, and the hotel gets robbed. While he gets robbed, they handcuff Doug to a pipe. He can't go anywhere, and he is holding 2 joints in his pocket, and the police are on the way. And my man was scared to death, because in those days you go to jail for 2 joints. I mean, you you didn't get no slap on the hand or no big fine. You went to jail. More than likely you would go to jail. And anyway, he's about to sweat it, but when they got there, they unlocked him, and he immediately said, "Oh man, I feel sick." And they let him go in the restroom, and they flushed both of those joints down right away. But Doug stayed out there as long as he could. He had a incident happen where Percy Sledge and Percy's girlfriend got into a fight in the van. This was when they were all just running somewhere in the van. And it was like two men fighting. You know, the woman could hit just like a man. She's fierce. And the van is wobbling, going through the tunnel. The van is actually wobbling because the girl was a heavy girl. When she'd go that way, the car would go that way too. And if Percy and her were on that side, that car's going to lean a lot to that side. Anyway, Doug resigned the very next day. He said he couldn't take any more of that. That was just too much. He said, you know, we could have wrecked. I could have gotten caught in the middle of the fight and everything. It was just too much after the robbery, you know. He said, I don't think I belong on the road. But, you know, Twiggs did things like Henry Wynn was the biggest African-American promoter in the whole South, you know, all the way to Texas, okay? I mean, he was the man. If you were a black act, you needed to play for Henry Wynn. You needed a contract with Henry. Henry paid, you know. He never shorted anybody. And he also owned the Royal Peacock in Atlanta. And turns out it was all a cover for his bug racket, because he was running the bug racket. He was getting filthy rich off of the bug racket. But he came to see me one time and told me, he says, look, you package all my shows for me. Just don't have me losing a lot of money. He said, if I just break even, I'm happy. He said, this is really a cover for my work back at the cab company. And I said, what do you do at the cab company? He said, that's where the bug operations operated out of, you know. And he was always very wealthy, sent his daughters through college and all, and he was always polite, neatly dressed, sharp guy. But he ended up getting busted and doing serious time for the bug thing. They found $280 in his cab safe, another $180,000 in his mattress in his home. And